If you see this here, right, so you have Great Nicobar here, and right next to it, this place is so important here that we want development, especially in this particular island, because of its location. The entire global trade, agar aap dekhoge, it passes through this particular region. So naturally, right, whoever has control over this region has huge economic advantage, has huge trade advantage, has huge strategic sort of advantage as well. Agar aap tribal community ko dekhoge, land is not just asset to them, land is not just property to them. ठीक है, लाइफ जो है इज कनेक्टेड टू देयर लैंड, उनका वर्ल्ड व्यू जो है इट इज़ कनेक्टेड टू देयर लैंड, उनका रिलीजन जो है इज कनेक्टेड टू देयर लैंड, उनका आइडेंटिटी जो है दैट इज कनेक्टेड टू देयर लैंड. यू एंड आई, अगर आप देखोगे, सिंस द टाइम वी हैव बीन बोर्न, राइट, मल्टीपल वैक्सीनेशंस विद इन द फर्स्ट फ्यू मंथ्स ऑफ बर्थ, बट दे हैव हैड नन, right? They have not had the exposure to these kind of microbes. That is, something that you and I have very common. ठीक है? So if they suddenly come in contact with the outsiders, right, एक health का hazard है. A simple infection for which they don't have the immunity can become a death sentence for the entire community. अब ये important question यहाँ पे ये है कि why a project here, especially when it is a sensitive region. In fact, in 2024, हमारे President Draupadi Murmu ji had gone to the Great Nicobar Island, right? And then you had 39 experts from all over, right? Some great experts, some really important names. They said that while we are trying to convert them into the Hong Kong of India and so on, it would endanger the Shompen. The phase 1 के लिए, just for the development के लिए, we have 1 million trees to be cut. Real development has to be balanced development, while you take care of, have the nation grow, but the communities of that nation, definitely no community of that nation should be sacrificed. Let me ask you something. A simple question मैं पूछ रहा हूँ, ठीक है? If I tell you there is a place that has been in the news in recent times, देख सकते हो, ठीक है? एक very important decision that is about to take place. In fact, the decision has already been taken. Right? It can result in two things. It can make India very, very strong globally, economically, strategically. At the same time, there is a possibility that it could even wipe out an entire tribal community forever. And it sounds extreme, but ye sach hai. And that is why you will see that it has been in the news almost every single day in recent times. And this is happening in no other place. ये हमारे Great Nicobar Island में है. तो today हम देखेंगे ये issue क्या है. We'll try to understand different sort of dimensions of it. यहाँ पे पहले where are these kind of islands and who are the tribals who are living here, right? Why does the India the country, why does the Indian government want development here so bad, right? And development is always good, but why are anthropologists and even let's say some environmentalists, why are they deeply sort of concerned? So ये सब थोड़ा सा analyze करेंगे. Let's start. So just to set the context, now while I'm telling you that it has been in the news, right? Why has it been in the news, right? So you can see all different sort of angles here. For example, यहाँ पे आप देखोगे कि Great Nicobar Project, there's a draft plan to relocate the affected Nicobarese families, and that creates confusion because absence of clarity on relocation sites in terms of numbers, consent process, and so on. So you understand there are some issues here. The Great Nicobar tribes, a time to live or a time to die. Critical. ठीक है? Fiction of consent in Great Nicobar. So consent has not been done in the proper manner, right? Free, prior, informed consent जो होना था, right? So far as for developmental sort of process, is that not happening? But one thing for sure is that project though it has been cleared. NGT last month has already cleared, right? So it upholds the clearance amidst environmental concerns and many other sort of concerns as well, right? So first thing, now that you've understood what is the context here, let's take a look at where is this Great Nicobar, जहाँ पे all of these kind of questions are arising. ठीक है? So Great Nicobar अगर आप यहाँ पे देखोगे, it is basically Andaman and Nicobar. ठीक है? So it's in Bay of Bengal, right? And again, so whenever these kind of news articles come into अगर news में है, तो you should also take a look at, मतलब study it in different ways. Geography is kind of important. For example, Andaman Nicobar अगर आप देखोगे, ठीक है? On top here, what do you have? You have the Coco Island. Right, Coco Island, and उसके बाद you have Coco Channel, right? So Coco Channel के बाद you have your North Andaman, उसके बाद you have your Middle Andaman, you have your South Andaman. South Andaman is kind of important because you have your Port Blair, the capital. उसके west में अगर आप देखोगे, of course you cannot see it here. Is it west? Yeah, west. On this side, it is going to be your North Sentinel Islands, right? Then you have Duncan Passage. Duncan Passage के बाद you're going to have your Little Andaman. Little Andaman के बाद 10 degree channel. These things become important, ठीक है? Then you have your Car Nicobar. Then you're going to have your Little. Right, Little Nicobar, and then you're going to have your Great Nicobar, right? So उसके बाद, of course, you're going to have your Great Channel and and so on. This is basically the geography. This particular island here, which is at the bottom here, जहाँ पे आपका इंदिरा पॉइंट वगैरह है, that is the one जहाँ पे all of these are essentially happening, right? So again, so geography अगर आप देखोगे, so 10 degree channel, right? There could be a question कि where is a 10 degree channel? What does it separate? So it separates the Andaman group from your Nicobar group. Okay, great channel, right? So it's also basically called as your 6 degree channel. It is between the island that we're going to study today, the Great Nicobar, and the Sumatra or the Indonesian set of islands and so on. This is basically where you have your Indira Point, right? The southernmost tip of India is not the peninsular part, it is actually in the islands, and it is on the Great Nicobar Islands, right? So classic map-based questions also आपको you should know. But this is your Great Nicobar, and Great Nicobar has been in the news. Great Nicobar, अगर इसका geography देखोगे, it is first of all, it has two very important national parks on this island, on Great Nicobar, north में and southern portion में. The northern wala portion, if you can see, it is the Campbell Bay National Park. It is the larger one. It is approximately 425 square kilometers, and this entire island is approximately 1,000 square kilometers, almost 40%. 42%, right? And both of these things were actually notified in 1992, but in the southern portion, downstream अगर आप देखोगे, there is a smaller one. This is 110 square kilometers. It is a Galathea National Park, again notified in 1992. ठीक है? It is a southern portion of your Great Nicobar. Again, both of them are extremely diverse, and in fact, this entire island is part of your UNESCO UNESCO recognized biosphere reserve, right? So you have biosphere reserves and you have UNESCO recognized biosphere reserves. It is that important, right? There are very important sort of species as well. We'll just take a look at it in the next one, right? And we'll come back to this. If you see this here, right? So you have Great Nicobar here, and right next to it, this place is so important here that we want development, especially in this particular island, because of its location. इसका लोकेशन इंपॉर्टेंट क्यों है? अगर आप देखोगे, ये जो है बिटवीन योर मलेशिया, इंडोनेशिया एंड वहाँ पे सिंगापुर वगैरह है, इट इज़ वेरी क्लोज टू दैट मलाक्का स्ट्रेट. मलाक्का स्ट्रेट इज़, मतलब आपको पता होगा, इट इज़ वन ऑफ द बिजिएस्ट ट्रेड रूट्स इन द होल वाइड वर्ल्ड, right? And China say anything essentially comes in this way, or East Asia say anything that essentially has to come through this. The entire global trade, agar aap dekhoge, it passes through this particular region. So naturally, right, whoever has control over this region has huge economic advantage, has huge trade advantage, has huge strategic sort of advantage as well. But हमें strategic aspects and economic aspects से अलावा, let's try to take a look at some other things. कौन रहते इस island में, ठीक है? So if I ask you this particular question, is it just an island which is 1,000 square kilometers with empty sort of land? ऐसा नहीं है, ठीक है? मतलब there are living communities here, and they are not just any people, वो हमारे indigenous tribes हैं, ठीक है? Tribal communities, right? And they are unlike the tribes of the peninsular India. They are a lot more untouched. At least one of them is a lot more sort of untouched in comparison to the other. Two tribes are there. One is the Nicobarese tribe, और दूसरा वाला is going to be your Shompen tribe. Andaman and Nicobar में अगर आप देखोगे, Andaman Islands के some tribes are there, and they tend to be Negrito, meaning African kind of heritage के हैं, right? And if you take a look at it, without using technical terms, at the same time, if you take a look at the tribes in the Nicobar Islands, they have a lot more similarity with Southeast Asian, right? Mongoloid sort of features होते हैं. Right, so Nicobarese tribe is a larger tribe, 27 to approximately 30,000 population है, and they are not only in Great Nicobar Island. Of course, they are a large group in Great Nicobar Island, but they are also there in Car Nicobar Island. ठीक है, they are also there in Nankauri group of those places. So अगर आप देखोगे, अगर निकोबार में the largest sort of tribe or the largest sort of a group is going to be the Nicobarese, right? Relatively, in comparison to, let's say, the Shompen, you will notice that they are fairly settled group है, coastal group है, agriculture है, fishing है, a little more sort of contact with the outside world है, right? Shompen are different. In the beginning जो मैंने कहा था, right? So I was trying to say that at least one particular tribe के लिए it is much more dangerous in comparison to the other. The reason is ये might be 30,000 people, but this is only a group of 200 people, 300 people, 400 people. Right? मतलब एक शादी में जाओगे, also you will actually come across more people there. You understand, right? And they tend to be in a lot more interior, right? यहाँ पे agriculture, fishing वगैरह, so they tend to be a lot more in coastal. But of course, 2004 वो tsunami के बाद they've actually sort of migrated a little inside. Some of the land has been lost as well. But ये है interior forest में, the heartland of the Great Nicobar Island में you'll find the Shompen. And ये जो है, it's a very small community and वो बहुत vulnerable भी है. So even within the tribal community अगर आप देखोगे, they tend to be the most vulnerable. So they've been placed in a group called as particularly vulnerable tribal group or PVTG. आज भी अगर आप देखोगे, they tend to be nomadic or at least semi-nomadic. Going forward, a lot of changes are probably going to happen. They still tend to be hunting and gathering sort of community and very low sort of contact with the outside world. You understand, right? So Nicobarese, large group, settled group, mostly coastal group, and in other islands as well. But Shompen, tiny, isolated, and hinterland forests of this Great Nicobar Island. Right? So that's what you have. So two very important sort of communities. That is with regard to the people, but it's not only the people who live here, right? You even have flora, fauna. At least we'll take a look at some of the fauna. यहाँ के जो species are there, right? वो मतलब endemic to this region, and they are very, मतलब you will see them in your Netflix and Discovery Channel and Animal Planet. मतलब कहीं और नहीं मिलते. Very very interesting, very very मतलब unique sort of species यहाँ पे बहुत सारे हैं. In fact, this is the, if you can see this here, we even had a stamp here, Nicobar megapode, a very important bird in the Nicobar region. ठीक है, and you will find them repeatedly mentioned in many conservation मतलब discussions वगैरह होंगे ना, तो you will have them, right? So they are still there, okay, but of course going forward हमें देखना पड़ेगा, we should have enough sort of protection. In fact, you have another one which is the Nicobar long-tailed macaque. It's an endemic mammal in this particular island, and anthropology may we basically study the primates of different sort of regions. So you have one group that is very unique, again not something that is found in other sort of places, and very interesting. ठीक है, you have one, and I don't know how many of you guys must have seen this. This is basically the robber crab or the coconut crab. मतलब बहुत striking feature है ये. मतलब it is not a small sized crab. ठीक है, it's very very large. Now I'm not sure. This one is definitely from Nicobar Island, but this is a coconut crab from maybe the neighboring sort of region. मुझे पता नहीं कि exactly where, but can you see the size here? ठीक है, it is much larger. Can you imagine like you're on an island and ऐसे बहुत सारे इतने बड़े are like running towards you, right? These are things अब movies में देखोगे, but this is actual reality. हमारे इंडिया में है ये सब. ठीक है, and very few people would have actually known it, right? मतलब आप भी सोच सकते हो, right? Did you ever think that you have something? मतलब this looks like a coconut tree, right? ये coconut tree है. Imagine being this big. In fact, this could be many kgs, right? And उसका the limbs जो है, the leg वाला portion that you can see without using technical terms, it tends to be close to a meter. Can you imagine this? This is 1 meter. Right, so that big it is, right? Leatherback sea turtle is another one that is very, very important. It is one of the largest that you have in the entire world. In fact, it is actually called as a global turtle hotspot. ठीक है, and in fact they come to this particular island for nesting. अगर आप यहाँ पे देखोगे, ठीक है, so it's a huge sort of a concern, especially with environmentalists, and that's why why this specific sort of island, because they have chosen it, right? This is the island where they have been. Right, इसके अलावा भी बहुत सारे species are there. Saltwater crocodile of the Nicobar sort of region, that's also an important one. And you can see, look at the size of this, right? So India में अगर आप देखोगे, right, within Andaman and Nicobar Islands we have a lot of interesting species. You've got to be careful, right? Ecologists are saying, it's a very sensitive region, so handle with care is essentially the message जो वो आप हमें दे रहे हैं. अगर यहाँ पे देखोगे, if we come back here, ठीक है, the reason why we are looking at this is that we are looking at that project that we are building, right? India is trying to build a massive project here in this particular island. क्या क्या हम build कर रहे हैं, अगर आप यहाँ पे देखोगे, especially in this particular portion is where the development is being planned, right? So this is only the phase 1, and we are slowly working our way towards more sort of projects or more sort of infrastructure and so on. So there is going to be a transshipment sort of a port because like Singapore, like Hong Kong, there's going to be an international airport. There's going to be a modern township. There's going to be roads. There's going to be infrastructure. There is going to be solar parks. You can see this. Okay, it's a large scale project. Okay, it's a very large scale project. You can see 81,000 crores, and later they said 92,000 crores. Maybe after a few months you will see a little more, right? So you can see this township here. Civilian and military, international airport, transshipment port, right? Gas and solar based power plants and many things. This entire island is how many? It is 1,000 square kilometers. And right now we are focusing here, 150 here, 8 something, 7 something, right? And one and so on. मतलब ये important question यहाँ पे ये है कि why a project here, especially when it is a sensitive region? Why, because you have flora, you have fauna, and you have tribes. They're all kind of, endemic to this region. It's a sensitive sort of area, right? And flora तो हमने देखा नहीं है, fauna तो आपने देखा है, ठीक है? The short answer here is because China. एक China का factor becomes very important. China is actually expanding its presence in the Indian Ocean to a great extent. Everybody knows this, right? So from 20 years ago, somebody had written about this, calling it the string of pearls, right? उनका influence वो increase कर रहे हैं, right? Starting from your Hambantota port in your Sri Lanka to your Chittagong port in Bangladesh. Pakistan तो आपको पता है, ठीक है? उसके अलावा Djibouti is there. You have it's the entire sort of region में. So they're building a lot of ports. They're having a lot of bases. They're having their area of influence to a great extent. Of course, they have their own version for it. They call it the encirclement strategy and so on. So India also wants to have a strong presence. Okay, we don't want to be boxed in. Okay, we need to have a strong presence. We need to have some kind of a trade advantage. We need to have, more importantly, strategic security. Look at this, right? It is dual use civilian and military international airport. Okay, so you can understand, so the strategic security angle is kind of strong here. So from India's perspective or from the government's perspective, this project is important from those angles. But there are other sides as well, right? So we mentioned this in the beginning, there is a difficult question. Anthropologists, ecologists, they're saying, tread lightly, be very careful and so on, right? What happens to the tribes? What happens when development comes in? What happens to the tribes, especially the Shompen tribes, which are a very small population, 200 people, 300 people, 400 people, and they exist only in this one particular island. Agar aap dekhoge, generally the story remains the same. There tends to be, whenever we go to a place that is a tribal area, right, displacement hota hai unka. They lose their forests. What used to be their land, wo abhi unka land nahi hoga, right? And especially if अगर आप ट्राइबल कम्युनिटी को देखोगे, लैंड इज नॉट जस्ट एसेट टू देम, लैंड इज नॉट जस्ट प्रॉपर्टी टू देम, ठीक है? लाइफ जो है इज कनेक्टेड टू देयर लैंड. उनका वर्ल्ड व्यू जो है इट इज कनेक्टेड टू देयर लैंड. उनका रिलीजन जो है इज कनेक्टेड टू देयर लैंड. उनका आइडेंटिटी जो है दैट इज कनेक्टेड टू देयर लैंड, राइट? एनी टाइम वीव हैड सडन कॉन्टैक्ट, राइट, इट इज ऑलवेज बिन अ प्रॉब्लम. राइट, यू टेक अ लुक एट द लास्ट 200 years अगर आप देखोगे, ठीक है, मेनी ट्राइब्स इन सेंट्रल इंडिया का एग्जांपल अगर देखो, झारखंड देखिए, छत्तीसगढ़ देखिए, राइट, मोस्ट ऑफ द ट्राइब्स while we have developed those regions or it has become mining hubs, industrial hubs, क्या हुआ उनका? The tribes, right, they had to come out of their traditional systems. They lost those traditional systems and they ended up क्या कर रहे हैं वो? Many of the tribes, at least a huge percentage of them or a huge proportion of them have become wage laborers. ठीक है, इंडस्ट्रियल एरिया है तो इंडस्ट्रियल वेज लेबर, एग्रीकल्चरल एरिया है तो एग्री वेज लेबर, बट वेज लेबर, right? So the percentage or the proportion of the people, of course there are people who are doing really well. We have starting from the president of the country, ठीक है, to IAS officers and many other doctors and engineers and so on. But proportion अगर देखोगे, wage labor is essentially what has been the highest sort of proportion. So यहाँ का lesson क्या है? अगर we suddenly increase that exposure to the outside world, right, it need not mean कि वो उनके लिए true development है, right? If you go by past data, it only leads to marginalization. So यहाँ पे we have to ensure कि we are more careful about that. And the last one is also your disease risk. North Sentinel Islands also you have very, very similar thing that happens. So whenever you have been कहीं पे भी अगर वो you have these isolated tribes and they've been living in isolation with very little sort of culture contact, and if they are going to have a lot of culture contact or physical contact with you and me, right, this is going to be the first time they're going to be exposed to many microbes. ठीक है, we are walking carriers of many microbes, right? So you and I, अगर आप देखोगे, since the time we have been born, right, multiple vaccinations within the first few months of birth. ठीक है, पहले 3 महीने में मतलब 3 बार, ये थाई में, यहाँ पे, right? So all of these things are there, but they have had none, right? They've not had the exposure to these kind of microbes. That is, something that, you and I have very common, ठीक है? So if they suddenly come in contact with the outsiders, right, एक health का hazard है. A simple infection for which they don't have the immunity can become a death sentence for the entire community, right? And this is something that has been pointed out multiple times. In fact, in 2024, हमारे President Draupadi Murmu ji had gone to the Great Nicobar Island, right? And then you had 39 experts from all over, right? Some great experts, some really important names. They said that while we are trying to convert them into the Hong Kong of India and so on, it would endanger the Shompen, right? Severely. Is that clear? So, for example, even organizations like Survival International, right, they actually amplified the same kind of warnings provided by these kind of scholars and these experts, right? Critics जो कह रहे हैं कि मतलब this could, any kind of such contact could actually result in catastrophic, like population collapse हो सकता है. Decline नहीं, population collapse हो सकते हैं, right? If one person has weak immunity to certain kind of microbes या infectious disease, right, one person affect नहीं होंगे, पूरा community affect हो सकते हैं, पूरा community को हम so an entire community could get wiped out. So ऐसे बहुत सारे concerns भी वो we have to understand that this is a real sort of possibility. So अभी अगर आप देखोगे the real question क्या है, मुद्दा क्या है, ठीक है? The core question यहाँ पे is going to be कि what do we do now, right? We want development. We understand the China का factor, right? We understand Malacca Strait. We understand string of pearls, encirclement strategy. Should India stop development in Great Nicobar Island? Answer could be no. Okay, that is also important. Should the tribes then be ignored, especially the Shompen? The answer has to be a no. So what is the answer? Okay, that is where anthropology essentially comes in. If you are an anthropology trained student, right? So or anthropology trained administrator, okay, you're going to be thinking now not just theory, right? So you have to really make those kind of decisions wherein one option has pros and it also has cons. The other option also has a lot of pros. It has some severe cons. What could be your approach? What should be the approach? See, anthropology jo hai, it is actually a way of thinking. It is a way of thinking. So for example, if you see this, what could be something that we have to do? For example, in fact, in some of those articles that you had seen, the consent ka angle was there. What is exactly the consent ka angle? In fact, some tribal chiefs had said that, they made us surrender, any kind of document that we had, right? And without giving us clarity on what we are surrendering, right? And some technicalities, of course, I'm not going to go into it, right? So, so that is not valid. So whatever it is, real consent, make it in letter and in spirit. Second thing is, development agar hame karna hai, right? You have northern portion में a larger national park, ठीक है, and then you have the Galathea National Park, right? So you have both of these. कितना हम limit कर पाएंगे हमारा development, उतना better होगा, ठीक है? We should not treat the entire island as an island for our development. It's not empty land. ठीक है, सिमिलर थिंग हैड बीन डन. एक ग्लोबल एग्जांपल अगर आप देखोगे, ब्राज़ील में द अमेज़ोनियन रेन फॉरेस्ट जहाँ पे है, दे व्हेन द रोड्स वर एक्चुअली बिल्ट डीप इनसाइड द फॉरेस्ट ना, इट अफेक्टेड मेनी ट्राइब्स. फॉर एग्जांपल देयर इज अ ट्राइब कॉल्ड एज यानुमामी. आप गूगल करके देख सकते हो द यानुमामी, ठीक है. उनके एरियाज़ में एनक्रोचमेंट हुआ, उनके एरियाज़ में इलीगल माइनिंग हुआ, इलीगल लॉगिंग हुआ, एंड लॉट्स ऑफ डिजीज आ चुके हैं. यू अंडरस्टैंड ना? सो उनके लिए इफ़ यू सी, इट हैज़ बिन लॉस ऑफ लैंड हुआ, increase in different sort of diseases हुआ. In fact, malaria was another thing, and cultural breakdown हुआ. You understand, right? Once we open these areas, right, completely, we cannot control what follows after that, right? And the government, cannot take responsibility for every single person who's entering that territory. So in Nicobar also, we have to be careful. So development जितना हम restrict कर पाएंगे only to those specific sort of zones, उतना better होगा, right? Respect the Shompen way of life, especially the Shompens, but also the Nicobarese. But Shompens are even more sort of endangered in this thing, right? If they want to basically remain isolated, let's respect their right to remain isolated. Now you might think that that is not good for you because I said so, I feel so, mujhe pata hai, right? So you also ask this counter question. Has forced culture contact with any particular group, has it ever worked well? अगर ग्लोबल एग्जाम्पल्स उठा के देखोगे, whenever there is forced sort of a contact with more developed sort of community and a little, a tribal sort of community, almost never has it worked out well, right? For example, in the North Sentinel Island, आपको पता होगा कि क्या है, right? What happens, right? There is a very clear government policy कि there should be no forced contact. अगर आप जाओगे, and some people have tried to go to those kind of places, you could be arrested, and there are certain laws and so on. You have to understand why they want to be isolated, because isolation उनका एक protection है. They feel anytime I'm having contact with the outside sort of world, ठीक है, मेरे community में 10 deaths हो रहे हैं, 20 deaths हो रहे हैं, right? They may not be able to explain microbes and virus and bacteria and antibiotics. They might not be able to do this. But one thing they can do is tell patterns. If there is contact, right, there has been deaths. Right, Andaman and Nicobar में, especially after colonial contact, this has happened. There's the same story that has happened, a few 100 miles north. ठीक है? So, and that is that. Also, the next one, if you can see. So, उनका एक strategy है. Survival is basically something they feel कि मतलब, हमें थोड़ा सा isolation चाहिए. हम उसको backwardness नहीं मानते हैं. ये हमारे survival के लिए ये एक आवश्यकता है. ठीक है? It's a necessity for us. ठीक है? Use zoning. Right, zoning is, see, for example, when we have these biosphere reserve, we have very clear sort of areas, right? You have the core area, you have your buffer area, you have your transition area, and so on. So, यहाँ पे also, we have to have very clear rules कि whoever is going for development, ठीक है, you have to understand. It is not one uniform sort of plan or one uniform sort of an island. ठीक है, ये development zone है, ये buffer zone है, buffer zone for you, for us, we should not be entering, but उनके लिए it is okay. And there should be core area जहाँ पे हम नहीं enter करेंगे, but that is completely their sort of area. You understand this, right? Such examples, such zoning policies have helped for certain tribes in the world. Australian Aborigines में, especially in the northeast sort of territory में, some of them, right, they had some of these areas declared. मतलब वहाँ का zoning is slightly different. वो sacred zones हैं. There are some non-interference या no external sort of influence वाले zones हैं, right? It has actually helped them in better sort of cultural preservation in comparison to the other tribes within Australia itself. Some tribes के लिए तो बहुत बुरा situation हुआ है. Stolen generations. You can read more on it. Okay, we study this in Anthro. Controlled exposure, right? एक principle है. Don't suddenly force that integration. Right, again, if we take the examples of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, right, many of these tribes, उनका क्या हुआ? Forest का access, they lost it, and once they lost it, it never came back. They had to enter the market suddenly, for which they're not ready. ठीक है? And उसका result क्या हुआ? Because they could only find one thing that they could do in the new world. Wage laboring. ठीक है? Industrial wage labor, agricultural wage labor. ठीक है? Traditional economy, gone. Access to the forest, gone. Poverty, increased. Native Americans are another sort of example. Take a rapid integration when the white settlers had come to, the North America, right? It actually resulted in मतलब बहुत सारा land disposition. यही हुआ, ठीक है? अभी भी poverty है, addiction है, identity crisis है, loss of religion है. Most of them, they don't remember their own sort of language. They've lost their language, they've lost their religion, they've lost their way of life. So lesson ऐसा है कि development जो है, we have to be very careful. We have to be gradual. We have to be much better prepared with all the kind of scenarios because we have learned it from the world over. And most importantly, development has got to be, culturally sensitive. And we can do all of these things if we include anthropologists, especially when it comes to planning. Okay? Do not leave everything to the engineers and the planners and the economists and so on. Okay? Include different voices. For example, anthropologist voice. And because I told you about the different kind of fauna, the species, include ecologists. Right? Madhav Gadgil, he recently passed away, I think a few months ago in Jan, right? So he has, he's talked about many things, right? Whenever there has been the humans try to sort of play with the food web, okay, or, the animal kingdom, right? It has never been positive, right? They've all been there in a particular place, living the way, becoming who they are and so on, right? So, how much of it we are going to lose? Right? The phase 1 के लिए, just for the development के लिए, we have 1 million trees to be cut. 1 million trees. And this is equatorial kind of forest. You can imagine the kind of trees. I've not been there, right? But can you imagine, just close your eyes and just visualize कि कितने बड़े-बड़े trees होंगे. Can you imagine having to sort of cut those? 1 million trees, 10 lakh trees. Phase 1 of the project. Okay, so include anthropologists, but again, I'll also say include ecologists, include the local voices of the Nicobarese, of the Shompen. Okay, New Zealand is a good example. Maoris को अच्छे से उन्होंने integrate किया है because participation rights है, cultural respect है. The world today knows and respects the Maoris. Okay, one day, hopefully, they will also be able to know about the Nicobarese and the Shompen in a positive light. Is that clear? Bolivia is another sort of example. Under another Evo Morales, right? So, he paid a lot of attention to respect their tribal identity, ensure that, their local voices are included whenever there is governance, right? So they should be part of that. So include all of these things, and that way, development we can take development, but at the same time, we'll ensure that the development works, right? It works for all parties. We can't have somebody who's a victim and somebody who's going to be a partner or, gainer from that particular development, right? In fact, India mein na, we have a whole tribal panchsheel, right? So Jawaharlal Nehru and especially Elwin, a very famed British anthropologist who had come to India. In fact, he even married into Indian tribes. He introduced this that we should have something called as tribal panchsheel, which is exactly India's policy with regard to tribes. And it is so good that a lot of the features that were brought in the world over, so far as indigenous tribes were concerned, much later aaya tha. This essentially came in late 1950s in India. The same sort of policies and principles have come. United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, 2007 mein aaya, that's like 50 years later, right? So a lot of it has come. So India is respected so far as the tribes are concerned, and India's policy with regard to the tribes are concerned, because many countries have not done well with regard to their tribes. India has tried to maintain. हमारे policy में, हमारे intention में, it is always to ensure that unity in diversity जो हम कहेंगे, right? Most of them are essentially these tribes, right? So उसको हमें maintain करेंगे. We want to maintain these. ठीक है? So net अगर आप देखोगे, overall, how do you going forward? What do we do here? ठीक है? First thing is that you have to understand. Practically speaking, project is coming. ठीक है? The trees, 1 million of them, it is going to be felled. Cut करेंगे. The animals that are there that you have seen, exotic sort of animals, right? They are going to be affected. The tribes are going to be disturbed and maybe even moved. We don't know. Again, it's at this process. It is at least all news है, all जो plans है, all kind of indicators जो मैं देख रहा हूँ, it is all basically pointing in that one direction कि there is no going back from this. So the important question अभी ये होगा कि should development happen here or not? ठीक है? That is not the question in fact. ठीक है? It should be that ये debate is basically done. Right? It is, the actual question should be कि इसको हम कैसे करें? How do we basically do the development here? And how humanely can we do the development? And when I say humanly, ठीक है, also think of all the the flora and fauna as well, right? As less disturbed, the better. In fact, if you take a look at an example from the US, right? US में in the 1830s, there was a whole episode called as Trail of Tears. Some of you might know it, but basically the story is that you have a particular tribe called as a Cherokee tribe. It is a fairly large tribe. US में अगर आप देखोगे ना, it is 570 something tribes है, federally मतलब recognized sort of tribes. उसमें Cherokee is also one such tribe. When the white settlers had come here and they want to develop these places, they want to settle in these kind of places, they wanted to move the tribes. वो savages हैं, वो barbaric हैं, ठीक है? It doesn't matter if we move them. Literally, Andrew Jackson was the president. He actually made a law saying कि Indian Removal Act. Native Americans को उस समय they used to be called as Indians or Red Indians. Not a politically correct term, of course, today, right? But and that was the case. And they said this, ठीक है? Either you move or be moved, right? Either you move or be moved. And literally many were forced to move at gunpoint, 1,000+ miles, whether it's from Alabama, from South Carolina, from Georgia, many of these kind of places, far into the west, जहाँ पे कुछ है नहीं to survive. And बहुत सारे, 1/3 of the population essentially died. And I'm talking thousands or tens of thousands, huge numbers, okay? And so on. Today, वो regions वगैरह में development है. But how did you develop? At what cost did you develop? Culture को destroy किया, lives have been lost, and a permanent moral stain on the US. At least the ones so far as, they know the history of America, ठीक है? They know for sure that, there is a black mark, right? And, and उसको हम wipe off नहीं कर पाएंगे, ठीक है? And that is something that we don't want, right? You ask yourself, do we want to repeat that kind of a model? Right? We don't want that. Is that going to make the world a better place? Is it a better model for the world to take? ठीक है? All of these things are definitely going to be here. Definitely not. And as I said, India में अगर आप देखोगे, India has always claimed कि, something important, ठीक है? That we are one of the most sensitive countries towards tribal communities. Always. Right? From the time period, from very relevant ideas that I told you, to Nehru's tribal panchsheel in late 1950s. So we said, tribes, let them develop at their own sort of pace. Do not impose anything upon them. ठीक है? उनका लाइफ को ज़्यादा disrupt मत करो as much as possible. At least definitely don't do it suddenly, right? But अभी we have a test, the Great Nicobar Project. It's not a theoretical sort of a test, it is not just policy making sort of a test, it is in the actual implementation, right? The policy is there, there is a project that is coming in, right? How well do we deliver both in letter and spirit? So we do need development, okay? And definitely trust me, okay, with all those things in and around Malacca Strait and the presence of certain countries in different sort of places, strategic security जो है India के लिए बहुत important है, right? We need strong presence, near Malacca Strait. We need all of this. मतलब कोई उसमें कोई प्रश्न नहीं है, कोई doubt नहीं है. But how do we do this? Can we ensure that the damage can be minimized as much as possible, both for the people here, especially the Shompens, and also ecologically? Can we ensure that the impact जो है, it is controlled or reduced sort of impact, negative impact? Can we ensure that a small, vulnerable community that today is all over the news, all over the global media, okay, does not suddenly disappear? They've lasted all the way, tens of thousands of years. Right? The Shompen, think about them. Very small population, highly isolated. Okay? No exposure to many microbes and diseases. If their population declines, या उनका health के लिए sudden shock वगैरह होता है, या मतलब they lose access to their forest and nutrition and so on, वो local issue नहीं बनेगा. It is going to be a global issue. It is going to be a global ethical issue. And India will be answerable. Because we hold ourselves to a higher standard. And we've always done that. And the world expects the same thing from India. Not just growth, okay? We are not China. The world expects responsible growth. So the final answer, it cannot be an emotional answer. It cannot be an extreme answer. And that is clear. Real development has to be balanced development while you take care of, have the nation grow. But the communities of that nation, definitely no community of that nation should be sacrificed. Okay? Economy should be allowed to grow, but the ecology, the fragile economy, the ecology, okay, all those species that I just told you, none of them should actually get destroyed, right? How do we do that? It's a tough question, right? Where will, how do you basically communicate to those leatherback turtles and, tell them ki abhi ye wala region is going to be a no-go sort of a region? We can't do that. So it's a very tough thing. And that is why I say anthropology jo hai, it is not just a subject with syllabus and, to write for your UPSC. It's also a way of thinking. It's a way of policy making. It's a way of being more humane, right? So now with this, I actually want to just think seriously. If you were already a anthropology trained administrator and assume that you're not only the implementation authority, you're the policy maker, you have the implementation authority, the file is right on your table, 92,000 crores, right? How do you deal with this? Will you approve this project exactly as it is at this moment? Would you actually stop it, completely? Temporarily? Will you say that it has to be redesigned in certain kind of ways, and if yes, in what ways? And what specific steps do you think you will take to ensure that, that living community that has been living here for thousands of years is not suddenly uprooted, is not suddenly sort of destroyed? How do you protect the Shompen? How do you balance the development that we need, which I'm saying we need, with the dignity for them? And in fact, please write your answers in the comments, and I really want to know. And not general answers. I want you to think like an administrator. I want you to think like an anthropologist. I want you to think humanely. Because that kind of thinking is what will actually make you a really good, responsible, moral, ethical civil servant. And also a better human being. And I will go through all of your comments. That's it for today. I will see you guys in the next session. Take care. Bye-bye.